My wallet pieces have been trimmed of extra thread and the pins have been placed. The most important part of putting the liner to the outer wallet is that when you stitch down the liner, it's very important that you only sew through that one outer liner piece and not the inside piece. Otherwise, you're going to sew together shut the part of the pocket that you've built with that extra liner piece to place the cash. So that's a pocket. You don't want to sew the top of your pocket shut. So when you are taking this to the sewing machine, be sure that you can feel with your finger that you have enough space for seam allowance so that you're sewing that outer wallet piece to that inner liner piece, the polka dot one, okay? Not, in this example, the flower piece, okay? Just this piece to this piece. I've reset my stitching so that it is no longer on the basting stitch. Make sure you hit the clear button or the reset or place your stitch length back to that 2 1/4 millimeter length that the sewing machine should default to. Really, no matter what kind of sewing machine you have, they usually will default to their original settings if they are computerized. If it is an old manually operated machine, you'll have to spin it back from its longer stitch length to its regular 2 1/4 millimeter stitch length. I'm starting part way along on what will become the top of the wallet, right at that pin, because this, from that pin to that pin behind it there, will become the opening that I leave. So I'm starting here, and I'm actually going to sew all the way around this wallet using a pivot at every corner. I've been careful to make sure that I'm not sewing that inner liner and that I'm only sewing the outer edge. And it's really important at this stage to remember a back stitch. So there's my back stitch. You don't have to run 4 or 5, 1 or 2 stitches forward and back are enough to secure it. I'm also running my stitch quite close to that outer edge. It's a fine line between being too close that the whole thing will fray and become a hole, and being too close to the inside that it will sew your pocket shut. So that's probably the hardest part of sewing this seam. Once I get here, I can really just follow my basting stitch. If I sew on this side of my basting stitch, I'll see the basting when I go to turn it right side out. I actually want to sew just on the left side of my basting stitch to hide it in my seam allowance and not have it show on the outer side. Because it's a baste, I can just pull it with a seam ripper if it does stick out once I'm done sewing this all together. I'm coming to this one bottom corner, nice and slow, using the hand wheel to get that corner really nice and accurate. Here comes my pivot. I always brush it and make sure everything's nice and flat so that I don't have any puckers. And now I can continue to run towards that next pin. I'm going to stop, take out my pin. It's always a good idea to make sure that everything is lining up and isn't puckering in underneath as you go. I like to stretch it so it's just a little bit pulled flat, but not pulled so hard that it wants to resist. Let the feed dog take the wallet. The feed dog is that little snaggletooth piece underneath where the throat plate is here that's pulling the fabric along. You just want to let that throat plate do the work for you. Here comes that last corner, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. I've come to the end here. You can see that my stitch started down here, but I'm finishing up here so that with a back stitch, so that I've got a little hole here. This is how I'm going to turn my wallet right side out, but there's a little trimming trick that we're going to do first. Before turning your wallet right side out, take your shears and trim that corner edge off of your wallet on all 4 corners. You really want to get rid of that extra fabric because when you go to turn it right side out, you'd like there to be as much of a 90-degree corner as you can get, but all that fabric bunches in on itself as it turns inside out, and it won't give you a nice clean corner if you don't get rid of the extra bulk. So trim those and then reach into this thing and pull this whole piece right side out by just pulling little bits at a time. I've now turned this wallet right side out. You can still see that there's that little opening where I had to turn it. I went in while I still could and was careful to make sure all these corners are as neat and square as you can get them. Then I lay them flat by hand, but I'm also going to come back to the iron and press all of that nice and flat. I'm going to turn that very small, fine corner edge in just as best I can, and also press each of those sides with the iron so that I can run a top stitch across there. The wallet's been pressed as best I can get it so that it's also pressed in half. I've pressed all of these bits, and I've pressed that little opening so that I can go over to the sewing machine and run a top stitch all the ways around the edges. When you run this final top stitch, it's a really good idea to pull back on the liner ever so slightly so that your liner is just on the inside and your outer fabric is just beyond. That means that when my wallet is closed, I'm not going to have liner fabric popping up outside the edge. I'm only going to see the good copy, or the outside of my wallet fabric. At this point, you could choose to top stitch all the ways around the edges. I'm just going to top stitch this top edge so you could see what it would look like if it was finished like that. Here's that finished wallet with a top stitch only running along the upper edge. When I fold it up and close it, you'll see that there's the top stitch from here. There's my inside where I might put my cash. I can fold this little guy closed, and you can see that my top stitch is showing only along that upper edge. This other demo wallet has been top stitched all the ways around the edges with a white thread to accentuate it as a design feature so that when it closes you can see that it has that thread detail all the ways around. It's completely up to you how you would like to top stitch and finish your wallet according to what design detail you are looking for.